Hey guys, this is Jeremiah Bigley here, and I am going to do a little tutorial vid on how to use my new script that I made. It's a script that is kind of meant to condense and potentially replace in a workflow all of the render to texture dialog box. I tried to get everything that I could in here so that you're not having to go through a bunch of different settings or having to go to the render settings, the render to texture dialog box, having to deal with hopefully anything, and it'll just be through this one box. And this script originally started out as a Material ID automation script because I don't like to use the explosion method. I find it tedious, and I don't know, it's just tedious and slow to me, I guess. I mean, now the Material ID process can be slow as well, and it can be kind of boring because originally I would just take down the information on a notepad file and then match it on my high poly, and that can be just as tedious and boring. But I guess with the explosion method, I didn't like having to move all of my low poly and then move on my high poly. Now, I mean, on an object like this little scene, this is going to be what I test the script out on for you guys. It wouldn't be a big deal in a case like this because you're having to move like 20 objects. It's really not that big of a deal on small scale objects, but when your objects start getting more complicated, like guns, vehicles, and even bigger possibly, you really don't want to have to go and move your low poly piece, or I mean your low poly, which could be 50 elements, and then your high poly could be a few hundred elements. I mean, you never know, and all the bolts, you might not have been smart enough to link all the bolts to the high poly or group them all to the objects that they're going to be moving with or attach them all. Sometimes you get in you're just getting, I don't know, a speed flow where you're just trying to get something done and you're not really worrying about necessarily being clean. I know sometimes I go back and just clean up a file when I'm when I'm ready to submit it. So I guess I'm going to show you how to use my script. Like I said, it's meant to, well, I mean, this part of it's going to, in my case, is meant to replace the explosion method. I hope you guys end up liking the method, possibly using this and the script overall to save some time. I've been using it in production for a little while, and I'm kind of passing it around work, and I got another guy using it. He likes it once he gets used to it, I guess, but hopefully some of the other guys are going to start using it too. I mean, I just finished this, so I've only been kind of testing it with the one guy, but here we go. I'm going to select my low poly. If you don't have your low poly selected and you hit this button, it's going to say select a low poly to begin the Material ID process. Now, you probably want to hide everything that you don't want to include in this process. I'm just going to hide everything that I don't want, and just so you guys can see. Here's my high poly and low poly. I tend to colorize my low poly so that I can see the difference pretty quickly between my high and low. So, whoops, let me do that. Alright, so I'm going to select my low poly, and I'm going to hit the Material ID Start button. And what that's going to do is it's going to explode each of these low poly objects, or each of the elements within the low poly, into a whole nother object. So it just exploded every element of the low poly. And then on top of that, it created these 12 materials you see now here in the material editor, which opened up. So it created these 12 materials for you to go and drop on your low poly and high poly as a kind of like a visual, so you can match up these material IDs. It's kind of like a visual matching up for you, so you don't have to do the lame way and go into your low poly elements and select elements and set it through the editable poly menu. It's a pain. So it's this easy. I'm going to go and select these guys and set them to a red, and since I'm done setting those, and I grabbed my high and low, since I'm done setting those, I'm going to hide that. Close this. I'm going to select this sphere and I'm going to put it on its own material ID. I got the high and low there. I'm going to hide that. I want all these bolts on their own ID, so I'm going to put that on yellow and put this guy on green. And I'm doing all these on separate elements just to show you, just to kind of show you, it can work with multiple material IDs. Normally you wouldn't need this many material IDs as long as your objects are far enough apart. Set that one to green and hide all. And then hide those again. Alright, so that is my setup now, and now that I have everything set up, I'm going to relaunch my script and I'm going to hit the Material ID End button, and that's going to recombine my low poly. It's also going to set all the elements based on the materials you applied. So all the red was on Material ID 1, orange was on Material ID 2, yellow was on Material ID 3, and it went through the low poly and set all these elements to that Material ID. And it also dropped a matching Material ID with a material modifier. It dropped a matching ID on the high polys as well. So that quick, I now have my material IDs set up, and it's ready to start tweaking my cage for baking. I didn't even that quick. I guess it would take a lot longer to have exploded that, even just something like this. So I'm now going to work on my cage. I'm going to push it out here just a little bit to get it started, and then I'm going to export my cage here on my script. And when I export, it's going to export it, name it cage, and give it a specific color that I use for a cage. And all these materials are changeable within the script, so you can go in there and change it to your own material that you like. Made it fairly easy for you to go and change a lot of the default settings in this script. I'll talk about that more on my Polycount post. Alright, so I got my cage, and I'm going to start pushing these guys out. So I'm going to select my add poly on here, and I'm going to start. I guess those guys are good. I guess the only thing I need to push out is this here. Push that out. And then I'm going to add another add poly modifier on this, and then select another element and do another push. And this guy has to be pushed out pretty far to cover for those massive floaters I have in there. And so I'm done with my cage. That was fairly quick. It's a fairly easy model to work a cage for. And I'm going to go back to my low poly here, and I'm going to import my cage through my script. So I'm going to go import and then click on my cage. Now it hid my cage, so it's still there. I guess it hid it for you. And then you can check shaded cage on so you can see the new cage and make sure it looks good. Everything does look good. So I'm ready for test baking. So there are a couple other things in here. You can start it the old-fashioned way if you don't want to do this material ID. I guess I'm not sure if I said, but when you hit the material ID end, it added the projection modifier and auto added all the high poly that was not hidden. So kind of sped up the workflow a little bit. But you could also do it through the pick method like you would normally, and there are a couple other things I'll probably talk about on the Polycount post. It's not too important on here. Most of the stuff on here is self-explanatory, but I wanted to cover kind of the key features. So I'm going to add a test normal matte bake, a test diffuse matte bake, and a test light tracer map, a lighting map bake. And real quick, I'm going to go in and make sure I have these guys set to a color so you can see the diffuse map bake out. It'll be like for my mask, I guess, in Photoshop. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to output these. It's going to take you, when you hit the ellipsis button here, it's going to take you to the directory that you have your max file saved. Because by this point I would hope that you've saved your max file. I'm going to create a new folder in here in my structure and call it maps. Enter, and it's going to auto append on your normal map acronym that is default in the script. You can change that. I have it set to a capital N for normal, so I'm going to go, oh, and it also pulled the name from the object, so it's object name underscore your default acronym. Save that. Diffuse. Go ahead and save that. And lighting that, go ahead and save that. So padding for 512, and ray miss check is on because these are our tests. Looks good. I'm going to go ahead and bake, and you get the frame buffer. That's a default that you can change. And I'm going to pause this while this renders. Okay, so I had to render twice because I forgot to turn on the hit only matching material IDs checkbox, and that was kind of the whole point of this script. So I went and rendered it again with hit only matching material IDs checked on because we did set up our material IDs. And right when you finish rendering, you get all of your maps here pop up. They pop up in their own window, so you can actually view the maps that you've rendered out rather than having to go and look at them in a browser, you know, because this visual frame buffer, when you're rendering, this doesn't show you what your maps look like. So I like that instant feedback, so I wanted these to pop up. So everything's looking good. You can see the ray miss on the maps here, getting the pink on the normal map and the red on the white. Yeah, it looks good though. About what I expected. I'm going to close these. And it looks like I'm ready for my high quality render. So I'm going to convert these into the high qualities by hitting the, instead of the test buttons next to them, I'm going to hit the normal map. And then you can see the name changed from a normal map test to just normal map. And I'm going to change diffuse and the light tracer. One thing to note about the light tracer is when I hit that, it's actually set up a skylight out here for you that's white. So I'll set that up for you. Alright, so for my high quality test, I'm going to set my map size here. It defaulted to 2048. I'm going to do it as a 1024. Padding a 20 is a default that you can change for the high quality. Ray miss check is now off, and it changed the high quality render settings to a Catmull ROM anti-alias filter, and it turned on your global super sampler, set it to Hammersley, and set the Hammer's quality to 1. I'm not going to wait that long. I'm going to do a max 2.5 star, and I think that is it. I'm going to go ahead and render out my final quality. Oh, make sure these are all 1024. Alright. Alright, I'm rendering out my final quality maps. Go. Alright, so my maps are rendered out. I got my high quality 1024 AO with the padding of 20. I got my diffuse that I rendered out, and here's my normal map. All high quality 1024 with anti-aliasing. And it's pretty good. It was about that quick. Alright, so if I wanted to, I can check these in Windows by right-clicking on the ellipsis button here, and it's going to browse you to the files. So if you wanted to drag them into Photoshop from here and start working on them, you could. A couple other things I want to point out is you have a mental ray AO here as well. I know some people prefer mental ray over light tracer, and some people prefer light tracer over mental ray. I actually really like both. Light Tracer has Light Tracer has a speed advantage, as well as floaters don't cast shadows, which is nice. You don't have to paint those shadows out out of floaters, because Light Tracer by default doesn't render back faces. That's really nice. Mental Ray will put the shadows around floaters, but I really like the look of a Mental Ray ambient occlusion. I think Light Tracer tends to come out a little splotchy. I don't know, I like the look of AOs out of Mental Ray. So something to notice here, you have some delete all elements in case you want to do some other, render some other elements out. You can delete them individually, and when you delete these, it's actually going to delete the skylight it created out. So I mean, and you don't have to worry about recreating it, because every time you create a Light Tracer element, it's going to recreate that skylight if needed. So I can go test, and on the Light Tracer AO, note that you have your Light Tracer settings down here. You have raised 250 on a default. That's what it defaults to in max whenever you normally render this out. I like to go a little higher on my high quality Light Tracer AO renders, because it gets rid of some of that splotchiness. So 500, and it still ends up being pretty fast, even faster than Mental Ray AO, but it just depends on what I want out of the AO, I guess. You have a color bleed setting. I know some people like to use color bleed in some of their maps to pull in some color from maybe some bounce planes or something they had. But yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and do a Mental Ray AO real quick. Let's do a test render just to show, and I'm actually just going to do this straight from the test render. I'm going to do a 1024. Don't need Remus check on. You can unlock this if you need non-square maps and change them individually. But I'm gonna Final Gather is off. It's here just to just to kind of show you that Final Gather turned off, because that's a mistake a lot of people make when rendering out Mental Ray AOs, is they leave Final Gather on, and it actually does not. Your ambient occlusion, your MR ambient occlusion, does not need Final Gather to render. It actually, all it does is increase render time, because it does multiple bounce passes. That does not affect the way the ambient occlusion looks. So that'll speed up your Mental Ray AOs quite a bit. So I'm going to go and change this to 128. Max distance I default to 25, because I find that 25 tends to work pretty good with the max default grid and the size I build at. I like 25, but you can change that in the default. You can change the default of that in the script. And I'd also just notice that when you hit the MRAO bake element, it auto switched you over to a Mental Ray renderer, and your Mental Ray, I guess the default scan line and the Light Tracer rollouts down here swapped out for a Mental Ray settings rollout. And so let me output this real quick. Low poly AO is good. I want a padding of 20, and I'm gonna hit bake. Yeah. I'm gonna pause for that. So here's my Mental Ray AO, and one thing I forgot to mention about Mental Ray versus Light Tracer AO is that Mental Ray doesn't actually support head-only matching material IDs. When you're rendering out, say, a Light Tracer AO, you can turn on head-only matching material IDs, but if you notice when I switch to Mental Ray AO, I have that turn off, because you get some really strange, inaccurate results when rendering with head-only matching material IDs. It doesn't work. I've tried multiple times, and you always get really strange results. It may look right at a glance, but when you go to actually put it on your model, you notice that shadows might be showing up in weird places, or light is showing up in weird places. So I have that turned off whenever you apply a Mental Ray bake element. So I think that is about all I wanted to cover on my script. Everything else pretty much self-explanatory. You got padding. You can figure out how to delete stuff out of here. You can clear your high poly geometry out of your projection if you wanted to. So I can clear that. So now I'm not projecting any high poly elements anymore. I can reset my cage from here. And smart high poly is kind of a smart pick, I guess, when you if you were to, let me delete the projection off here and show you that real quick. So if I go smart high poly and I go in here and select one of my high polys, apparently I need to add a projection modifier. I don't even know my own script. So I'm going to add a projection modifier and go smart high poly, and I'm going to pick a high poly element here, and it's going to add all of my high polys based on name and based on the materials that are similar to the object that you picked. So I mean, it's there. I don't know if I personally would use it. It might have just been me over scripting. I guess putting features in that aren't necessarily necessary just because I could. But alright, I guess that's it. I hope you guys can find my script useful. I hope you guys use it. I hope it saves you time. Hope you like the method I sort of thought up for automizing applying material IDs for the hit only matching material ID method. If you have any questions or want to report bugs or request things for maybe future, and I do mean very far in the future updates, you can email me at Jeremiah Bigley at gmail.com, and that's also in the script here. I have my contact, my website, and my contact here. You have, I guess, just general notes talking about the README file that I'm going to make for it, and here are all the settings I was talking about that you can change for the defaults for. So, alright, let me know if you guys find it useful. Let me know if you do end up using it and liking it. Bye.